morning, everybody. Sorry for the delay. I'm a little bit slow this morning, but I'm happy to be back. Last week, my a cousin from my mom's side of the family came over to my house unexpectedly, so I was unable to stream because I obviously had to look after her and spend some time with her. So thank you for your patience, but we're back to our regularly scheduled programming. And of course, today is part 4 of the Tale of Genji. We're only a tiny bit into the book. The book is very, very long. But yeah, so for those of you who are new, this is the Tale of Genji. The book is about 1,000 years old. It was written by a Japanese woman who used to be part of the emperor's court back in the day. The Tale of Genji started with the first book being about his parents, how they fell in love. The mother was a mid-level courtier, with no real influence. His father is the emperor. The mother was very beautiful and kind and sweet and all of that, and the emperor is the emperor. I guess he's not that important. And they had a baby, Genji. Unfortunately, because the mother of Genji was of such a low status in the court at the time, she was bullied and eventually left the court and died of heartache from the bullying, which is very sad, of course. Then the grandmother unfortunately passed away, which is also very sad. And so Genji ended up back in the court at the tender age of 6. By all accounts, Genji is the perfect child. He's young and handsome, and he's eloquent, and he writes poems easily, and he does mathematics easily, and he's just Mr. Fantastic. And he's now been married to one of the ministers for the emperor, and he has a wife, but he's kind of in love with one of the emperor's concubines, and now some other lady he's had been spied on, and so now he's kind of hanging around outside her house to see to see her. I guess he wants to meet with her. So we're going to start off from there. We're on book 4, I believe. It's called something of the faces, the event of the face. Yes, TLDR Coder. He's just the emperor. He's not important at all. He's about as interesting as a spoon, I guess. But here we are. I would just like to say thank you to those who have followed me in the last while. Jason Zede, Zindar, Rykor Gaming, Foxed Follows, and Wolfie Gamer Girl 17. Thank you guys so much. Your follows and views obviously make a big difference in my life, so awesome. Alright, so we're going to start in a moment. I just remembered I need to close the doors, otherwise you guys will hear ambient noise from outside. It's getting quite hot though, because where I am, it's summer. So 1 second and then we'll start. All right. I hope the volume is okay. I know there'll be a little bit of an echo because I'm not inside a booth, and the room I'm recording in is quite large, and there's not enough furniture in it to dampen the sound. I am working on my sound though, so hopefully eventually I will have perfect sound. Anyway, thank you guys. So thanks TLDR Carter, and thank you for always being there to help me with my stream. You are the best. Thank you. Alright, so we're going to continue the Tale of Genji. I hope you guys enjoyed today's reading. Let's get started. Chapter 10. The bright moon of the 8th... Oh, let's start. Blah, 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 blah. Hi there, Ice Shade. Thank you for joining. I'm so happy you could make it. We're just starting, so woo! And thank you, Burin Beaton. Thank you everybody. Oh, sorry guys, let's try that again. Alright. Chapter 10. The bright full moon of the 8th month came flooding in through chinks in the roof. It was not the sort of dwelling he was used to, and he was fascinated. Towards dawn, he was awakened by plebeian voices in the shabby houses down the street. Freezing, that's what it is, freezing. There's not much business this year, and when you can't get out into the country, you feel like giving up. Do you hear me, neighbor? So I have read this, but I'm just doing like a bit of an overlap because I was a bit terrified that I missed a chapter somewhere along the line. He could make out every word. It embarrassed the woman that, so near at hand, there should be this clamor of preparation as people set forth on their sad little enterprises. Had she been one of the stylish ladies of the world, she would have wanted to shrivel up and disappear. She was a placid sort, however, and she seemed to take nothing painful or embarrassing or unpleasant too seriously. Her manner elegant and yet girlish, she did not seem to know what the rather awful clamour up and down the street might mean. He much preferred this easy-going bewilderment to a show of consternation, a face scarlet with embarrassment, as if at his very pillow there came the booming of a foot pestle, more fearsome than the stamping of the more fearsome than the stamping of the thunder god. Genuinely my god, this morning is a bit rough start. Sorry guys. Genuinely ear-splitting. He did not know what device the sound came from, but he did know that it was enough to awaken the dead. From this direction and that there came the faint thump of fulling hammers against coarse cloth, and mingled with it these were the sounds to call forth the deepest emotions, were the calls of geese flying overhead. He slid a door open, and they looked out. They had been lying near the veranda. There were tasteful clumps of black bamboo just outside, and the dew shone in more familiar places. Autumn insects sang busily as if only inches from an ear used to wall crickets at considerable distances. It was all very clamorous, and also rather wonderful. Countless details could be overlooked in the singleness of his affection for the girl. She was pretty and fragile in a soft, modest cloak of lavender and a lined white robe. She had no single feature that struck him as especially beautiful, and yet slender and fragile, she seemed so delicately beautiful that he was almost afraid to hear her voice. He might have wished her to be a little more assertive, but he only wanted to hear her and wanted to be near her and yet nearer. Yeah, sorry guys, today's a bit wonky. Let's go off somewhere and enjoy the rest of the night. This is too much. But how is that possible? She spoke very quietly. You keep taking me by surprise. There was a newly confiding response to his offer of his services as guardian in this world and the next. She was a strange little thing. He found it hard to believe that she had much experience of men. He no longer cared what people might think. He asked Ukon to summon his man, who got the carriage ready. The women of the house, though uneasy, sensed the depth of his feelings, and were inclined to put their trust in him. Dawn approached. No cocks were crowing. There was only the voice of an old man making deep obeisance to a Buddha, in preparation, it would seem, for a pilgrimage to Mitaki. He seemed to be prostrating himself repeatedly and with much difficulty. all very sad. In a life like the morning dew, what could he desire so earnestly? Praise to the Messiah to come, intoned the voice. Listen, said Genji. He's thinking of another world. The pious one shall lead us on our way, as we plight our troth for all the lives to come. The vow exchanged by the Chinese emperor and young Kui Fei seemed to bode ill, and so he preferred to invoke Lord Maitreya, the Buddha of the future. But such promises are rash. So heavy the burden I bring with me from the past, I doubt that I should make these vows for the future. It was a reply that suggested doubts about his lives to come. Okay, so Genji is super in love with this girl, which is, I guess, what happens to all of us. And now he wants to take her out into public. Dun, dun, dun! The moon was low over the western hills. She was reluctant to go with him. As he sought to persuade her, the moon suddenly disappeared behind clouds in a lovely dawn sky. Always in a hurry to be off before daylight exposed him, he lifted her easily into his carriage and took her to a nearby villa. Ukon was with them. Waiting for the caretaker to be summoned, Genji looked up at the rotting gate and the ferns that trailed thickly down over it. The groves beyond were still dark, and the mist and the dews were heavy. Genji's sleeve was soaking, for he had raised the blinds of the carriage. This is a novel adventure, and I must say that it seems like a lot of trouble. And it did confuse them too, the men of old. This road through the dawn, for me so new and strange, how does it seem to you? She turned shyly away. And is the moon unsure of the hills it approaches, foredoomed to lose its way in the empty skies? I'm afraid. She did seem frightened and bewildered. She was so used to all those swarms of people, he thought with a smile. The carriage was brought in, and its traces propped against the veranda while a room was made ready in the west wing. Much excited, Ukon was thinking about earlier adventures. The furious energy with which the caretaker saw to preparations made her suspect who Genji was. It was almost daylight when they alighted from the carriage. The room was clean and pleasant, for all the haste with which it had been readied. There are unfortunately no women here to wait upon his lordship. The man who addressed him through Ukon was a lesser steward who had served in the Sanjo mansion of Genji's father-in-law. Shall I send for someone? The last thing I want. I came here because I wanted to be in complete solitude, away from all possible visitors. You are not to tell a soul. The man put together a hurried breakfast, but he was, as he had said, without serving woman to help him. Genji told the girl that he meant to show her a love as dependable as the patient river of the loons. He could do little else in these strange little lodgings. The sun was high when he arose. He opened the shutters. All through the badly neglected grounds, not a person was to be seen. The groves were rank and overgrown. The flowers and grasses in the foreground were a drab monotone and autumn moor. The pond was choked with weeds, and all in all, it was a forbidding place. An outbuilding seemed to be fitted with rooms for the caretaker, but it was some distance away. It is a forbidding place, said Genji, but I am sure that whatever devils emerge will pass by me. He was still in disguise. She thought it unkind of him to be so secretive, and he had to agree that their relationship had gone beyond such furtiveness. Because of one chance meeting by the wayside, the flower now opens in the evening dew. And how does it look to you? The face seemed quite to shine in the evening dew, but I was dazzled by the evening light. Her eyes turned away. She spoke in a whisper. To him, it may have seemed an interesting poem. As a matter of fact, she found him handsomer than her poem suggested, indeed frighteningly handsome given the setting. I hid my name from you because I thought it altogether too unkind of you to be keeping your name for me. Do please tell me now. This silence makes me feel that something awful might be coming. Call me the fisherman's daughter. Still hiding her name, she was like a little child. I see. I brought this on myself. A case of warekara. And so, sometimes affectionately, sometimes reproachfully, they talked the hours away. Koremitsu had found them out and brought provisions. Feeling a little guilty about the way he had treated Ukon, he did not come near. He thought it amusing that Genji should thus be wandering the streets, and concluded that the girl must provide sufficient cause, and he could have had her himself had he not been so generous. Thanks, Dale Viking. Genji and the girl looked out at an evening sky of the utmost calm. Because she found the darkness in the recesses of the house frightening, he raised the blinds at the veranda, and they lay side by side. As they gazed at each other in the gathering dusk, it all seemed very strange to her, unbelievably strange. Memories of past wrongs quite left her. She was more at ease with him now, and he thought her charming. Beside him all through the day, starting up in fright at each little noise, she seemed delightfully childlike. He lowered the shutters early and had lights brought. You seemed comfortable enough with me, and yet you raised difficulties. At court, everyone would be frantic. Where would the search be directed? He thought what a strange love it was, and he thought of the turmoil the Rokujo lady was certain to be in. She had every right to be resentful, and yet her jealous ways were not pleasant. It was that sad lady to whom his thoughts first returned. Here was the girl beside him, so simple and undemanding, and the other was so impossibly forceful in her demands. How he wished he might in some measure have his freedom. So we must all remember this is like Genji's third girlfriend. His second girlfriend on the side while he is still married. So, I guess if you're rich, you can do what you like. I don't know. I'm not here to comment on people's social structures and all that. I just think it's very funny that this guy is married, but he's got like stakey number 2 on the side here. So, let's continue. Chapter 12. It was past midnight. He had been asleep for a time with an exceedingly beautiful It was past midnight. He had been asleep for a time when an exceedingly beautiful woman appeared by his pillow. You do not even think of visiting me when you are so much on my mind. Instead, you go running off with someone who has nothing to recommend her and raise a great stir over her. It is cruel, intolerable. She seemed about to shake the girl from her sleep. He awoke, feeling as if he were in the power of some malign being. The light had gone down. Out. In great alarm, he pulled his sword to his pillow and awakened Ukon. She, too, seemed frightened. Go out to the gallery and wake the guard. Have him bring a light. It is much too dark. He forced a smile. You're behaving like a child. He clapped his hands, and a hollow echo answered. No one seemed to hear. The girl was trembling violently. She was bathed in sweat, as if in a trance, quite bereft of her senses. "She is such a timid little thing," said Ukon, "frightened when there is nothing to be at all to be frightened of. This must be dreadful for her." Yes, poor thing, thought Genji. She did seem so fragile, and she had spent the whole day gazing up at the sky. "I'll go get someone." What a frightful echo. "You stay here with her." He pulled Ukon to the girl's side. The light in the west gallery had gone out. There was a gentle wind. He had few people with him, and they were asleep. There were 3 in number. A young man who was one of his intimates and who was the son of the steward here, a court page, and the man who had been his intermediary in the matter of the evening faces. He called out. Someone answered and came up to him. "Bring a light, wake the other, and shout and twang your bowstrings. What do you mean going to sleep in a deserted house? I believe Lord Koremitsu was here." He was, but he said he had no orders and would come again at dawn. An elite guardsman, the man was very adept at bow twanging. He went off with a shouting as of a fire watch. At court, thought Genji, the courtiers on night duty would have announced themselves and the guard would be changing. It was not so very late. He felt his way back inside. The girl was as before, and Ukon lay face down at her side. "What is this? You're a fool to let yourself be so frightened. Are you worried about the foxbirds that come out and play tricks in deserted houses? But you needn't worry. They won't come near me." He pulled her to her knees. "I'm not feeling at all well. That's why I was lying down. My poor lady must be terrified." "She is indeed, and I can't think why." He reached for the girl. She was not breathing. He lifted her, and she was limp in his arms. There was no sign of life. She had seemed as defenseless as a child, and no doubt some evil power had taken possession of her. He could think of nothing to do. A man came with a torch. Ukon was not prepared to move, and Genji himself pulled up certain curtain frames to hide the girl. "Bring the light closer." It was a most unusual order. Not ordinarily permitted at Genji's side, the man hesitated to cross the threshold. "Come here! Come, bring it here! There is a time and place for ceremony." In the torchlight he had a fleeting glimpse of a figure by the girl's pillow. It was the woman in his dream. It faded away like an apparition in an old romance. In all the fright and honor, his confused thoughts centered upon the girl. There was no room for thoughts of himself. He knelt over her and called out to her, but she was cold and had stopped breathing. It was too terrible. He had no confidant to whom he could turn to for advice. It was the clergy one thought of first on such occasions. He had been so brave and confident, but he was young, and this was too much for him. He clung to the lifeless body. "Come back. My dear, don't do this awful thing to me." But she was cold and no longer seemed human. Oh my god, I'm really sorry, but I guess trigger warning, I think she just died. The first paralyzing terror had left Ukon. Now she was writhing and wailing. Genji remembered a devil a certain minister had encountered in the grand hall. She couldn't possibly be dead. He found the strength to speak sharply. "All this noise in the middle of the night, you must try to be a little quieter." But it had been too sudden. He turned again to the torchbearer. "There is someone here who seems to have had a very strange seizure. Tell your friend to find out where Lord Koremitsu is spending the night and have him come immediately. If the holy man is still at his mother's house, give him word very quietly that he is to come too. His mother and the people with her are not to hear. She does not approve of this sort of adventure." He spoke calmly enough, but his mind was in turmoil. Added to grief at the loss of the girl, with horror quite beyond describing at this desolate place. It would be past midnight. The wind was higher and whistled more dolefully in the pines. There came a strange hollow call of a bird. Might it be an owl? All was silence, terrifying solitude. He could not have chosen such a place, but it was too late now. He should not have chosen so. Trembling violently, Ukon clung to him. He held her in his arms, wondering if she might be about to follow her lady. He was the only rational one present, and he could think of nothing to do. The flickering light wandered here and there. The upper parts of the screens behind them were in darkness, the lower parts fitfully in the light. There was a persistent creaking as of someone coming up behind him. If only Koremitsu would come. But Koremitsu was a nocturnal wanderer without a fixed abode, and the man had to search for him in numerous places. The wait for dawn was like the passage of 1,000 nights. Finally he heard a distant crowing. What legacy from a former life could have brought him to this mortal peril? He was being punished for a guilty love. His fault for no one else's, and his story would be remembered in infamy through all the ages to come. There were no secrets, strive though one might to have them. Soon everyone would know from his royal father, and the lowest court pages would be talking, and he would gain immortality as the model of the complete fool. Wow, this took a bit of a turn for the dark from our earlier books. It was a little bit more frivolous, a little bit more lighthearted, but now we are a little bit more intense, I guess you could say. Finally, Lord Koremitsu came. Blah, blah. Chapter 13. Finally, Lord Koremitsu came. He was the perfect servant who did not go against his master's wishes in anything at any time, and Genji was angry that on this night of all nights he should have been away and slow in answering the summons. Calling him inside even so, he could not immediately find the strength to say what must be said. Ukon burst into tears, the full honor of it all coming back to her at the sight of Koremitsu. Genji too lost control of himself. The only sane and rational one present, he had held Ukon in his arms, but now he gave himself up to his grief. "Something very strange has happened," he said after a time. "Strange, unbelievable would not be too strong a word. I wanted a priest one does when these things happen, and ask your reverend brother to come. He went back up the mountain yesterday. Yes, it is very strange indeed. Had there been anything wrong with her? Nothing." He was so handsome in his grief that Koremitsu wanted to weep. An older man who has had everything happen to him and knows what to expect can be depended upon in a crisis. But they were both young, and neither had anything to suggest. Koremitsu finally spoke. "We must not let the caretaker know. He may be dependable enough himself, but he is sure to have relatives who will talk. We must get away from that place. You aren't suggesting that we could find a place where we would be less likely to be seen?" "No, I suppose not. And the woman at her house will scream and wail when they hear about it, and they live in a crowded neighborhood, and all the mob around will hear, and that will be that. But mountain temples are used to this sort of thing. There would not be much danger of attracting attention." He reflected on the problem for a time. "There is a woman I used to know. She has gone into a nunnery up in the eastern hills. She is very old, my father's nurse, as a matter of fact. The district seems to be rather heavily populated, but the nunnery is off by itself. It was not yet full daylight. Koremitsu had the carriage brought up. Since Genji seemed incapable of the task, he wrapped the body in a covering and lifted it into the carriage. It was very tiny and very pretty and not at all repellent. The wrapping was loose and the hair streamed forth as if to darken the world before Genji's eyes. He wanted to see the last rites through to the end, but Koremitsu would not hear of it. Take my horse and go back to Nijo now. Now, while the streets are still quiet. He helped Ukon into the carriage and himself proceeded on foot. The skirts of his robes hitched up. It was a strained, bedraggled sort of funeral procession, he thought, but in the face of such anguish, he was prepared to risk his life. Barely conscious, Genji made his way back to Nijo. So, from what I understand, the young lady he was with really did die, which is really sad. That's very terrible. I'm sorry. So I don't know what you guys think of the story so far, but we've just had like some really sad news. One of the girl has passed away, and yeah. Okay. Let's continue. Chapter 14. Where have you been? Asked the woman. You are not looking at all well. He did not answer. Alone in his room, he pressed a hand to his heart. Why had he not gone with the others? What would she think if she were to come back to life? She would think that he had abandoned her. Self-reproach filled his heart to breaking. He had a headache and feared he had a fever. Might he too be dying? The sun was high, and still he did not emerge. Thinking it all very strange, the woman pressed breakfast upon him. He could not eat. A messenger reported that the emperor had been troubled by his failure to appear the day before. His brothers-in-law came calling. Come in, please, just for a moment. He received only Tono Chujo and kept a blind between them. My old nurse fell seriously ill, and I took her vows in the 5th month or so. Perhaps because of them she seemed to recover, but recently she had a relapse. Someone came to ask if I would not call on her at least once more. I thought I really must go and see an old and dear servant who was on her deathbed, and so I went. One of her servants was ailing, and quite suddenly, before he had time to leave, he died. Out of deference to me, they waited until night to take the body away. All this I learned later. It would be very improper of me to go to court with all these festivities coming up, I thought, and so I stayed away. I have had a headache since early this morning. Perhaps I have caught a cold. I must apologize. I see. I shall so inform your father. He sent out a search party during the concert last night and really seemed very upset. Tono Chujo turned to go and abruptly turned back. Come now, what sort of brush did you really have? I don't believe a word of it. Genji was startled, but managed a show of nonchalance. You needn't go into details. Just say that I suffered an unexpected defilement, yet very unexpected really. Despite his cool manner, he was not up to facing people. He asked a younger brother-in-law to explain in details his reason for not going to court. He got off a note to Sanjo with a similar explanation. Okay, so he's very sad, which is expected. And he's, I guess, lying to everybody because there will be scandal at court if they had to know he was with a girl and she died in his presence. So, yeah. Let's just continue, I guess. Chapter 15. Koremitsu came in the evening. Having announced that he had suffered a defilement, Genji had callers remain outside, and there were few people in the house. He received Koremitsu immediately. "Are you sure she is dead?" He pressed a sleeve to his eyes. Koremitsu too was in tears. "Yes, I fear she is most certainly dead. I could not stay up in a temple indefinitely, and so I have made arrangements with a venerable priest whom I happen to know rather well. Tomorrow is a good day for funerals." "And the other woman?" "She has seemed on the point of death herself. She does not want to be left behind by her lady. I was afraid this morning that she might throw herself over a cliff. She wanted to tell people at Goju, but I persuaded her to let us have a little more time. I'm feeling rather awful myself, and almost fear the worst." "Come now, there's nothing to be done, and no point in torturing yourself. You must tell yourself that what must be, must be. I shall let absolutely no one know, and I am personally taking care of everything." "Yes, to be sure, everything is fated, so I tell myself. But it is terrible to think that I have sent a lady to her death." "You are not to tell your sister, and you must be very sure that your mother does not hear. I would not survive the scolding I would get from her. And the priests too. I have told them a plausible story." Koremitsu exuded confidence. The woman had caught a hint of what was going on, and were more puzzled than ever. He had said that he had suffered a defilement, and he was staying away from court. But why these muffled lamentations? Genji gave instructions for the funeral. "You must make sure that nothing goes wrong. Of course, no great ceremony seems called for." Koremitsu turned to leave. "I know you won't approve," said Genji, a fresh wave of grief sweeping over him, "but I will regret it forever if I don't see her again. I'll go on horseback." "Very well, if you must." In fact, Koremitsu thought the proposal very ill-advised. "Go immediately, and be back while it is still early." "Oh, I'm sorry, brooding beaten. Yeah, it can be frustrating when you switch applications." Genji set out in the travel robes he had kept ready for his recent amorous excursions. He was in the bleakest despair. He was on a strange mission, and the terrors of the night before made him consider turning back. Grief urged him on. If he did not see her once more when, in another world, might he hope to see her as she had been? He had with him only Koremitsu and the attendant of that first encounter. The road seemed a long one. The moon came out. 2 nights passed full. They reached the river. In the dim torchlight, the darkness off towards Mount Toribe was ominous and forbidding. But Genji was too dazed with grief to be frightened, and so they reached the temple. It was a harsh, unfriendly region at best. The board hut and chapel where the nun pursued her austerities were lonely beyond description. The light at the altar came dimly through the cracks. Inside the hut, a woman was weeping. In the outer chamber, 2 or 3 priests were conversing and invoking the holy name in low voices. Vespers seemed to have ended in several temples nearby. Everything was quiet. There were lights, and there seemed to be classes of people in the direction of Kiyomizu. The grand tones in which the worthy monk, the son of the nun, was reading a sutra brought on what Genji thought must be the full flood tide of his tears. He went inside. The light was turned away from the corpse. Ukon lay behind a screen. It must be very terrible for her, thought Genji. The girl's face was unchanged and very pretty. "Won't you let me hear your voice again?" He took her hand. "What was it that made you give you all my love? for so short a time, and then made you leave me to this misery." He was weeping uncontrollably. The priest did not know who he was. They sensed something remarkable, however, and felt their eyes mist over. "Come with me to Nijo," he said to Ukon. "We have been together since I was very young. I never left her side, not for a single moment. Where am I to go now? I will have to tell the others what has happened. As if this weren't enough, I will have to put up with their accusations." She was sobbing. "I want to go with her." "That is only natural, but it is the way of the world. Parting is always sad. Our lives must end, early or late. Try to put your trust in me." He comforted her with the usual homilies, but presently his real feelings came out. "Put your trust in me when I fear I have not long to live myself." He did not, after all, seem likely to be much help. "It will soon be light," said Koremitsu. "We must be on our way." Looking back and looking back again, his heart near breaking, Genji went out. The way was heavy with dew, and the morning mists were thick. He scarcely knew where he was. The girl was exactly as she had been that night. They had exchanged robes, and she had on a red singlet of his. What might it have been in other lives that had brought them together? He managed only with great difficulty to stay in his saddle. Koremitsu was at the reins. As they came to the river, Genji fell from his horse and was unable to remount. So I am to die by the wayside. I doubt I can go on." Koremitsu was in a panic. He should not have permitted this expedition, however strong Genji's wishes. Dipping his hands in the river, he turned and made supplication to Kiyomizu. Genji somehow pulled himself together. Silently invoking the holy name, he was seen back to Nijo. The women were much upset by these untimely wanderings. Very bad, very bad. He has been so restless lately, and why should he have gone out again when he was not feeling well? Bruh. Things are getting very serious. Seems like he's very sick, maybe with the same thing as that girl. So I'm going to read chapter 16 and then just take a short break. Chapter 16. Now, genuinely ill, he took to his bed. 2 or 3 days passed and he was visibly thinner. The emperor heard of the illness and was much alarmed. Continuous prayers were ordered in the shrine and that temple. The varied rites, Shinto and Confucian and Buddhist, were beyond counting. Genji's good looks had been such as to arouse forebodings. All through the court it was feared that he would not live much longer. Despite his illness, he summoned Ukon to Nijo and assigned her rooms near his own. Koremitsu composed himself sufficiently to be of service to her, for he could see that she had no one else to turn to. Choosing times when he was feeling better, Genji would summon her for a talk, and soon she was accustomed to life at Nijo. Dressed in deep mourning, she was a somewhat stern and forbidding young woman, but not without her good points. It lasted a very little while. I fear that I will be taken too. I must be dreadful to you, losing your only support. I had thought that as long as I lived, I would be able to see to all your needs, and it seems sad and ironical that I should be on the point of following her. He spoke softly, and there were tears in his eyes. For Ukon, the old grief had been hard enough to bear, and now she feared that a new grief might be added to it. All through the Nijo mansion there was a sense of helplessness. Emissaries from court were thicker than raindrops. Not wanting to worry his father, Genji fought to control himself. His father-in-law was extremely solicitous and came to Nijo every day. Perhaps because of all the prayers and rites, the crisis past it and let's try that again. Perhaps because of all the prayers and rites the crisis passed, it had lasted some 20 days and left no ill effects. Excuse me. Genji's full recovery coincided with the final cleansing of the defilement. With the unhappiness he had caused his father much on his mind, he set off for his apartments at court. For a time, he felt out of things, as if he had come back to a strange new world. Okay, so I'm going to have a break just to rest my voice. I'm a bit croaky today. We will finish this book and then I think we'll call it there for today, just because I'm not feeling 100% perhaps. So I'd rather take it easy and you guys don't have to listen to the wah, 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 wah of my voice. So see you all in 5 minutes. Oh, oops. Oh, goodness. I just read. Oh, no. Hi, everybody. I just realized I read to myself. Ooh. I thought I was reading to everyone. Okay. Who can remember which chapter I finished on? I think it was chapter 16. No, chapter. Yes, I finished on chapter 16. Okay. So I need to read the end of the book again. Gosh. Okay. All right. That's why the break was so long. I'm so sorry. All right. Let's try again, shall we? Chapter 17. By the end of the month, he was his old self once more. He had lost weight, but emaciation only made him handsomer. Blah, 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 blah. You know when you read a word, but you never have to say it out loud? He spent a great deal of his time gazing into space, and sometimes he would weep aloud. He must be in the clutches of some malign spirit, thought the woman. It was all most peculiar. He would summon Ukon on quiet evenings. I don't understand at all. Why did she so insist on keeping her name from me? Even if she was a fisherman's daughter, it was cruel of her to be so uncommunicative. It was as if she did not know how much I loved her. There was no reason for keeping it a secret. But why should she tell you about her insignificant self? Your attitude seemed so strange from the beginning. She used to say that she hardly knew whether she was waking or dreaming. Your refusal to identify yourself, helped her guess who you were. It hurt her that you should belittle her by keeping your name from her. An unfortunate contest of wills. I did not want anything to stand between us, but I must always be worrying about what people will say. I must refrain from things my father and all the rest of them might take me to task for. I am not permitted the smallest indiscretion. Everything is exaggerated so. The little incident of the evening faces affected me strangely, and I went to very great trouble to see her. There must have been a bond between us. A love doomed from the start to be fleeting, why it should have taken such complete possession of me and made me find her so precious. You must tell me everything. What point is there in keeping secrets now? I mean to make offerings every week, and I want to know whose name I am in and whose name I am making them. Yes, of course. Why have secrets now? It is only that I do not want to slight what she made so much of. Her parents are dead. Her father was a guards captain. She was his special pet. But his career did not go well, and his life came to an early and disappointing end. She somehow got to know Lord Tono Chujo. It was when he was still a lieutenant. He was very attentive for 3 years or so, and then about last autumn there was a rather awful threat from his father-in-law's house. She was ridiculously timid, and it frightened her beyond all reason. She ran off and hid herself at her nurse's in the western part of the city. It was a wretched little hovel of a place. She wanted to go off into the hills, but the direction she had in mind has been taboo since New Year's. So she moved to the odd place where she was so upset to have you find her. She was more reserved and withdrawn than most people, and I fear that her unwillingness to show her emotions may have seemed cold. So it was true. Affection and pity was welled up yet more strongly. He once told me of a lost child. Was there such a one? Yes, a very pretty little girl born 2 years ago last spring. Where is she? Bring her to me without letting anyone know. It would be such a comfort. I should tell my friend Tono Chujo. I suppose, but why invite criticism? I doubt that anyone could reprove me for taking in the child. You must think up a way to get around the nurse. It would make me very happy if you were to take the child. I would hate to have her left where she is. She is there because we had no competent nurses in the house where you found us. The evening sky was serenely beautiful. The flowers below the veranda were withered. The songs of the insects were dying too, and the autumn tints were coming over the maples. Looking out upon the scene, which might have been a painting, Ukon thought what a lovely asylum she had found herself. She wanted to avert her eyes at the thought of the house of the evening faces. A pigeon called somewhat discordantly from a bamboo thicket. Remembering how the same call had frightened the girl in that deserted villa, Genji could see the little figure as if an apparition were there before him. How old was she? She seemed so delicate because she was not long for this world, I suppose. 19, perhaps. My mother, who was her nurse, died and left me behind. Her father took a fancy to me, and so we grew up together, and I never once left her side. I wonder how I can go on without her. I'm almost sorry that we were so close. She seemed so weak, but I can see now that she was a source of strength. The weak ones do have a power over us. The clear, forceful ones I can do without. I am weak and indecisive by nature myself, and a woman who is quiet and withdrawn and follows the wishes of a man even to the point of letting herself be used has much greater appeal. The man can shape and mold her as he wishes, and becomes fonder of her all the while. She was exactly what you would have wished, sir. Ukon was in tears. That thought makes the loss seem greater. The sky clouded over, and a chilly wind came up. Gazing off into the distance, Genji said softly, "One sees the clouds of smoke that rose from the pyre, and suddenly the evening sky seems nearer." Ukon was unable to answer. If only her lady were here. For Genji, even the memory of those fulling blocks was sweet. In the 8th month, the 9th month, the nights are long, he whispered and lay down. So I think, if I understand correctly, the lady who just died, she had a daughter with Tono Chujo, who is Genji's best friend. Chapter 18. Young Page, brother of the Lady of the Locust Shell, came to Nijo from time to time, but Genji no longer sent messages for his sister. She was sorry that he seemed angry with her, and sorry to hear of his illness. The prospect of accompanying her husband to his distant province was a dreary one. She sent off a note to see whether Genji had forgotten her. "They tell me you have not been well. Time goes by. You ask not why I ask not. Think, if you will, how lonely a life is mine. I might make reference to the Masuda Pond." This was a surprise, and indeed he had not forgotten her. The uncertain hand in which he set down his reply had its own beauty. Who, I wonder, lives the more aimless life? Hollow though it was, the shell of the locust gave me strength to face a gloomy world, but only precariously. So he still remembered the shell of the locust. She was sad and at the same time amused. It was good that they could correspond without rancor. She wished no further intimacy, and she did not want him to despise her. As for the other, her stepdaughter, Genji heard that she had married a guard's lieutenant. He thought it a strange marriage, and he felt a certain pity for the lieutenant. Curious to know something of her feelings, he sent a note by his young messenger. "Did you know that thoughts of you had brought me to the point of expiring? I bound them loosely, the reeds beneath the eaves, and reproved them now for having come undone." He attached it to a long reed. The boy was to deliver it in secret, he said, but he thought that the lieutenant would be forgiving if he were to see it, for he would guess who the sender was. One may detect here a note of self-satisfaction. Her husband was away. She was confused, but delighted that he should have remembered her. She sent off in reply a poem that the only excuse for which was the alacrity with which it was composed. The wind brings words all softly to the reed, and under the leaves are nipped again by the frost. It might have been cleverer and in better taste not to have disguised the clumsy handwriting. He thought of the face he had seen by lamplight. He could forget neither of them, the governor's wife, seated so primly before him, or the younger woman chatting on so contentedly without the smallest suggestion of reserve. The stirrings of a susceptible heart suggested that he still had important lessons to learn. So Genji is married, as I've said before, but he's had 3 mistresses as well on the side, which is that. But it seems like the 2 other women he kind of left by the wayside have cooled their feelings for him, and now he lost somebody, and the other 2 women have nobody's interested in each other anymore, which I find very interesting. Chapter 19. Quietly, 49th day services were held for the dead lady in the Lotus Hall on Mount Hei. There was careful attention to all the details, the priestly robes and the skulls and the altar decorations. Koremitsu's older brother was a priest of considerable renown, and his conduct of the services was beyond reproach. Genji summoned a doctor of letters with whom he was friendly, and who was his tutor in Chinese poetry, and asked him to prepare a final version of the memorial petition. Genji had prepared a draft in moving language. He committed the one he had loved and lost, though he did not mention her name, to the mercy of Amitabha. It is perfect just as it is. Not a word needs to be changed. Noting the tears that refused to be held back, the doctor wondered who might be the subject of these prayers. That Genji could not reveal the name, and that he should be in such open grief, someone, no doubt, who had brought a very large bounty of grace from earlier lives. Genji attached a poem to a pair of ladies' trousers, which were among his secret offerings. I weep and weep as today I tie this cord. It will be untied in an unknown world to come. He invoked the holy name with great feeling. His spirit had wandered uncertainly these last weeks. Today it would set off down one of the ways of the future. His heart raced each time he saw Tono Chujo. He longed to tell his friend that the wild carnation was alive and well. There was no point in calling forth reproaches. In the house of the evening faces, the women were at a loss to know what had happened to their lady. They had no way of inquiring, and Ukon too had disappeared. They whispered amongst themselves that they had been right about that gentleman, and they hinted at their suspicions to Koremitsu. He feigned complete ignorance, however, and continued to pursue his little affairs. For the poor woman it was all like a nightmare. Perhaps the wanton son of some governor, fearing Tono Chujo, had spirited her off to the country. The owner of her house was her nurse's daughter. She was one of 3 children and related to Ukon. She could only long for her lady, and lament that Ukon had not chosen to enlighten them. Ukon, for her part, was loath to raise a stir, and Genji did not want to gossip at this late date. Ukon could not even inquire after the child, and so the days went by, bringing no light on the terrible mystery. Genji longed for a glimpse of the dead girl, if only in a dream. On the day after the services, he did have a fleeting dream of the woman who had appeared that fatal night. He concluded, and the thought filled him with horror, that he had attracted the attention of an evil spirit haunting the neglected villa. Chapter 21. Early in the 10th month, the governor of Io left for his post, taking the lady of the locust shell with him. Genji chose his farewell presents with great care. For the lady there were numerous fans and combs of beautiful workmanship and pieces of cloth. She could see that he had had them dyed specially for the wayside gods. He also returned her robe, the shell of the locust. A keepsake till we meet again, I had hoped, and see my tears have rotted the sleeves away. There were other things too, but it would be tedious to describe them. His messenger returned empty-handed. It was through her brother that she answered his poem. Autumn comes. The wings of the locust are shed. A summer robe returns, and I weep aloud. She had remarkable singleness of purpose, whatever else she might have. It was the first day of winter. There were chilly showers as if to mark the occasion, and the skies were dark. He spent the day lost in thought. The one has gone, to the other I say farewell. They go their unknown ways, the end of autumn. He knew how painful a secret love can be. I had hoped out of deference to him to conceal these difficult matters. But I have been accused of romancing, of pretending that because he was the son of an emperor he had no faults. Now, perhaps, I shall be accused of having revealed too much. That's the end of the Book of the Evening Faces, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone in between. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It was a bit of a sad book this time, not quite what I expected. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I will see you guys on Thursday, same time, same place. We're going to raid another channel now. And let's support some other streamers while we're at it. Whoop whoop. So let's go and raid. Dun, dun, dun. Dun, 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 dun.